In many cases, it was like, oh, we have money come back after 10 years, and we get a little bit of interest. But like, for them, that's all right. Like, it comes back after 10 years with some interest and a lot of information rights and access along those 10 years. So a lot of times, I think the LP investments, which are much more common, and a lot of top-tier VCs come through Japan to fundraise, not to invest. I think there's no secret, I think the Interesting Horowitz office that was opened, right, was unfortunately, was being a big thing. As publicity is like, oh yes, come and open an office, make a public statement, yes, we're interested to invest in Japanese startups and do something good. But the office is an LP office, right? So a lot of VCs come here because there is a lot of capital here. And as if they're a kind of credible name and they're able to give information and access. And capital, you're able to put some capital in trusted hands and it'll come back in 10 years. If it's a few X, that's great, but it's fine as well if it comes back with interest and a lot of information and access over the years. So I think that's been a starting point, not for everybody. There are definitely some very sophisticated corporates as well that are much stronger kind of, financial return kind of alignment. But a surprising number of Japanese corporates, plus other types of corporates around the rest of the world, are approaching it from that perspective.
I don't have much views about the Japanese ecosystem as you. However, from my research and what I have seen, I think most of the Japanese investors, they are investing in large-scale projects rather than the VC ecosystem. And as you have mentioned, we have seen a surge around CVCs, so a lot of corporate venture capitals. They are actually wanted to invest now in startups, and I guess that matches a bit with the profile of the Japanese investor. They are very risk averse, so anything innovative, I guess, it's very hard for them to invest. And plus, investing in a new idea or startup, I think that's the hurdle for a lot of investors, I can imagine. So even CVCs, actually, they are partnering with venture capitals because they don't have the know-how to run actually a proper venture capital. So they are, we have seen across the industries actually, they open a corporate venture capital. However, they always have to go for a certain partnership with the bigger VC in the space in order to accumulate that know-how and in order to get that access to the market, because most of, especially for example in banks in the FinTech space, most of the bankers, they don't have that agility to go around the space and scout for the right startups. I think the momentum is started, just as we have seen for the last 10 years, a good momentum. Now I can believe that it's going to be even more exponential, given that Japan is more open than ever to the international collaboration, but also within the local market.
Do you want to comment as well, or shall I ask a different question?
I can comment for regarding for the Japanese government in Japanese ecosystems. So there are several Japanese government funds that would help to start their own company from the scientists from academia. So the one example is the JST platform that would be, there are 9 platforms in Japan that would help the scientists to start their companies, and they can collaborate with the venture capitals to support, they can support to start their companies and their ideas and also their IB strategies and as well. And the second is the AMF fund, and the another novel example is the drug discovery ecosystem platform that some AMF certified VCs can invest to the company started from academia, and AMF will give the double amount of money for the startup. So I think the Japanese government gives a lot of money to support and grow the ecosystem for now.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question here? So my question is to you, Mr. Norbert, and I'm very interested in what you said, new middle class in Japan. So what kind of people will become new middle class? Is it only in Japan or maybe in other countries too? Or how they will become the new middle class?
I think the argument for creating the new middle class is increasing wages and increasing wages more than you have inflation actually, right? So ultimately, real wages need to rise. And I think there's structurally things that can happen beyond that in the labor market. And you see, again, some of the financial companies in particular, I think, have been in the vanguard of that, is changing the seniority-based employment system, right? So you actually get paid based on capabilities rather than on age. And that means that somebody who's 30 years old can be a department manager and manage 55-year-olds, right? And get compensated accordingly. And you see like Sompo Insurance, for example, has done changes in that regard. Mizo, I think, has started doing something similar as well. And so ultimately it means like raising wages, right? Because the compensation that you get in Japan today, even on a constant dollar basis, but never mind with the weak yen that we have right now, is ridiculous in an international comparison. Right? You can hire middle software engineers for like 5 to 8 million yen. That's what you spend on Uber rides in San Francisco or so, right? So that needs to go up. So that is the argument, but the reality, as I explained, is that in the magnificent job that I think the BOJ has done over the last 2 years, we still have real wages going down, right? And so when we talk about inflection points and so on, I think all the data I'm looking at, right, over the last 10 years, we've seen a decrease in ranking and relative position. And that means, it doesn't mean that Japan is not changing, right? That's a communication gap. People often think the saying Japan is not changing. Japan is changing. However, the world around Japan is changing faster. And that means, right, the gap gets bigger. And so an inflection point for me is when we get actually to a stage where Japan is starting to catch up and then hopefully overtake again. But we're far removed from that, in my personal opinion.
Thank you for your answer. Okay, question here.
I have a question. Can you hear me? Hi. Thank you very much for giving very valuable suggestion here. I'm Benjamin. I just graduated from Stanford last year, and I come to Japan to have a startup here. So I have 2 questions for you guys because you guys are so professional. So first thing is, what's the difference? Like, for example, for the startup founder like me, we are seeking for pre-seed funding. And what are the differences between the Silicon Valley style early investor and the Japan early investor? This is the first question. And the second question is, how is the Donald Trump administration affects Japan economically or like about like startup ecosystem or whatever thing here? So these are the 2 questions. Thank you.
Maybe I can cover that first. So I think maybe to start with the Trump administration is not really moving that much in terms of the venture ecosystem here. I think most of the venture ecosystem is too disjointed from that. And the reason is that most of the venture ecosystem here is very, very domestic. So there are a few investors like, Geodesic or Sozer others who kind of cross between, California and Japan and try to bring whether it be kind of US defense tech companies to Japan or otherwise. But, you have Japan moving from 1% to 2% of GDP focused on defense. And so defense tech is, I think, an area that you have a lot of high expectations for startups to come out from Japan. And I've spoken to many investors from overseas that want to invest in Japanese defense tech startups, but just there aren't enough of them yet. So I mean, that would maybe be one area, but it's not that much like you see the other ripples across other parts of the government and other parts of the world. In terms of how VCs are different, honestly, I think, so there's a lot of, just like in the startup ecosystem on the founder side, there's a lot of really, really talented people in the VC ecosystem. However, most of them have not built a unicorn before. I think there is some stat like only 3% of VCs in Japan have been operators before. Whereas in Silicon Valley, I think a lot of the best investors are like the PayPal Mafia, the people that have actually built and been operators and scaled up businesses. And so, unfortunately, it's hard to take advice and guidance and from people that if you're looking to build something out at the global scale, if you're looking to build a unicorn or a decacorn, there's just too few people involved in the ecosystem that have actually done that. So I think again, you're going to get a lot of smart, well-intentioned people that have maybe supported a lot of companies to go public in Japan. Right? Or have supported a lot of other different interesting paths. But depending on what you're doing, that may or may not be as relevant. And so again, with Antler, what we're trying to change is that we're running our residency in English first and trying to basically close out a lot of the noise within the ecosystem and build forward a new path for ambitious founders where then you can have global investors from day zero and go out and build. So I mean, if you're looking for your first round, our next Antler residency is starting on April 7th. For 10 weeks. If you're interested, very happy to talk. We have a handful of other serial entrepreneurs and groups in there, some ex-Stanford, I think, in this cohort as well. But yeah, I think depends completely on the business you're building, but if you're building a domestic business and you're just going after the domestic market, there's a lot of existing VCs that can support you very well. And if you're looking to build something globally, I think there's an increasing number of global investors that are open-minded to investing into Japan. And so those are the major differences, but I'd have to understand what you're building to understand who can support you the best in your growth.
A follow-up question, you just mentioned global investors who are interested in Japan. What are kind of their images looks like? I know, for example, at Silicon Valley, there are something like Y Combinator, they are more tech mania, something like this, but for the global investor interested in Japan, are they tech mania or more interested in financial, like FinTech, or what's kind of what's their appearance looks like?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say more the former on the global investors that are looking at Japan, because I think they recognize there's a lot of talent in Japan. However, most of the global investors that have looked at Japan until now have been at the growth stage, right? Whereas hey, we don't know how to differentiate in Japan, so we're not even going to bother to try. Once a company is at the growth stage and we can invest 20, 30, 40, $100 million, then great, as long as it kind of meets our criteria, we'd be open to it. However, there's just not enough companies like that. There's not enough of a pipeline of companies at the growth stage. So let's put that aside for a moment. That's where probably many global investors are open-minded to Japan at the growth stage. At the early stage is where, again, how is an investor who's not on the ground in Japan going to contribute to a company that is finding product market fit, right? At the pre-seed stage, right? It is very hard. And so, again, Antler is an example of a global investor that is on the ground in Japan, but is not Japanese in nature, right? The other examples would be people that don't have feet on the ground, but are open to your vertical. So, for example, last week I did a session with LifeX Ventures. I'm all the managing partner there, who they run a fund which is not one of these mega billion-dollar funds, but maybe $100 million specifically focused on life sciences, right? And like health tech and longevity and stuff like this, right? And they will invest globally in pre-seed, seed on this, and they have built multiple unicorns themselves and taken companies public in the States. But they're only they can create value in this vertical and in its niches, which is where they focus. So I think global investors at the early stage that have a very vertical focus is the other angle to it. And I mean, in AI as well, there were investors in town just this past week, in the last couple nights ago, speaking with some, or basically investing pre-seed AI, right? Or a seed AI. So if you're going to speak English and you're doing something that's globally competitive, and it's not like it depends on product market fit locally in Japan, then yeah, I think a vertical investor would be good at the early stage.
I want to take the last question. The last one. Okay.
Thank you. I have a question for Norbert. So maybe I missed some information that you provided to us, but you said that what is needed, you had one slide towards the end, said what is needed, and you summarized it as defense. Japan needs food security, and then energy. How did you come to that conclusion? Just in a brief summary.
Okay, I think defense is somewhat important if you, sorry for being blunt, if you don't want to be overrun by China, or maybe even the US, who knows in this environment. I don't know, right? Japan has obviously a constitution that prevents armament, and former Prime Minister Abe tried to change that. So that is one question on the legal side, but I think it's across the board that Europe is rearming, no doubt, and they're probably not going to do this with American weapons, right? So you need to be also self-sustained in the IP that you have in weapon systems. On the food security, I quoted the numbers, right? So 38% self-sufficiency on food on a calorie basis. So if you imagine there was a hot war coming, that doesn't take us very far. And 15% self-sufficiency on energy, that really any reserves that we have don't last that long. So if you imagine a conflict scenario, these are the three areas you should focus on. And maybe 6 months ago it would have said like regional revitalization, care for the elderly, etc. But I think we're living in a very different world right now.
That's in terms of the definition of what is needed is coming from the context of how to survive. I think, like for example, one thing that I thought was interesting was how you pointed out that college to the, that period from 15-year-olds to workers, there's this big gap that's not needed. That was interesting.
I think survival is a great thing, right? I think we should all try to do that. This is an impact summit, impact future weekend, right? And so I try to answer the question, what actually will have the greatest impact? And the decisions that you make have to be a balance, right? Short-term versus long-term. But clearly, and this goes back to post-World War II, Europe and Germany in particular, and Japan have relied on being under the US defense umbrella, and you don't have to bet, you can really see that these days in Tokyo and in Berlin, people thinking about what the defense posture is going to be going forward.
I have other questions, but I'll ask them first.
Okay, thank you so much.
Maybe one more. John, you started with AI. I'd like to get a double take on AI, especially also life sciences, right? All the Google Fold for proteins. I mean, there's a huge impact that these technologies have. Once on the startups you're supporting, but also secondly, how does your business as a venture capitalist change by you using AI? So, kind of both sides.
I just wanted to add to your question because I think they were probably more relevant to answer. When I said I think 1 decacorn is the most impactful thing that could happen, in Japan it's most likely not to be B2B software, right? It's I think somewhere the intersection of AI and deep tech is where there is a lot of room for Japan to lead, where we've had a lot of really that talent. And so, I think we all have seen many examples internally of how companies are doing more with less, right? But deep tech is, I think, where you still need more in more different ways. So I'm very curious the answers here on deep tech AI.
Yeah, I think actually the AI and also helps to proceed the drug discovery process, like identifying the antibody and creating such proteins for like a novel target. So yeah, and how the VC will change with this technology is that we are I think we are getting more smoothly to target the new opportunity that will help the startups or academias to foster the drug development. So we are happy to discuss with the new professors or startup CEOs to how this technology will help such a drug development. So I think that is my opinion.
Manal, in the Middle East, what is the take-up in terms of AI?
I think the momentum is going from the government level, which I haven't seen in other parts of the world. So the sovereign wealth funds, they are heavily investing in everything AI. For example, Mubadala, which is the Abu Dhabi sovereign wealth fund, it's the biggest wealth fund, the sovereign wealth fund now in the world. The second is PIF from Saudi Arabia. Third is Temasek, Singapore. They opened this new, it's like a sub-fund under the sovereign wealth fund called Core 42, where they are investing billions of dollars in existing AI companies and also emerging AI companies. So I think we have literally a race between Qatar, Oman, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE in the race of AI investing. We haven't seen many companies coming from the Middle East, from the developed